Well, Universities Australia has condemned what it says is a bipartisan attack on international students as the major parties consider slashing the number of foreign students coming into the country. Its chief executive, Luke Sheehy, has used a speech this morning to warn that the move is short-sighted and could cost the sector thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars. All of this is playing out ahead of the upcoming federal election, of course, where migration and housing is going to be the number one issue. Joining me now is University Chief Executive Luke Sheehy. Thanks so much for your time. Luke, this is bipartisan, you're right. Is this just a populist move, do you think?
Well, Australia's international education sector delivered nearly $50 billion to the Australian economy, and we know that last year it produced nearly half of our economic growth. So if we're talking about where Australia's economy is heading, we need to ensure we're supporting a sector that supports the Australian economy. So that's the case I'm making today, Laura, that if we're getting into a negotiated system with both the government and the opposition in an election year, that we have a positive outcome for this sector that's not only delivering for universities, it's delivering for other sectors like the tourism industry and supporting the work of what Australian universities need to do for the Australian economy, which is produce skilled graduates for the future jobs we have in our economy. So I'm making the case today that our sector should have strong support from both sides of politics. And when we go in to negotiate what the numbers will be, that the government and opposition recognise that important economic contribution that our sector has made for decades.
So do you accept that there needs to be a reduction? Would you accept that in any capacity?
Well, we want certainty, stability and growth for the university sector, and we need to recognise the important contribution that the revenues we get from international education make to our sector. They help support research and development, and they help support teaching, not only for international students, but for Australian students. So we're going to deliver on the things the government wants us to also do, like a Future Made in Australia or AUKUS. We need to make sure we've got the base level of funding that we need to do that, and that includes international student revenue. We can have a longer discussion with the government around how much direct Commonwealth funding or public funding we can get, but the reality is over the last number of decades we've been encouraged to diversify the income we get, and that includes international education. Both sides of politics have told us to do it. So we want to make sure that they recognise that, and they recognise that important economic contribution we make when we negotiate what the future looks like.
I mean, it's still one of our biggest exports, absolutely. So it contributes to our economy. It means that the budget's got money to spend on other things. We can't let that fall by the wayside at all. But this government in particular is putting a bit of the onus back on universities and saying, OK, you can have international students, but we've got a housing crisis. If you're having more international students, you need to find somewhere to house them on campus so they take the pressure out of cities like Sydney and Melbourne in particular. That's fair enough, isn't it?
Look, it is a fair proposition that every Australian domestic student and international student should have fair and equitable access to the housing market. That's an important thing, and we'll talk to the government and the opposition
But do
about
universities, particularly in those capital cities, have the capacity to find that on-campus accommodation? Is that realistic?
We know that more than 70% of local government authorities across the country have less than 1% of international students contributing to the rental market. It's in very small parts of the country where international students contribute more than 10% to the rental market. And overall, international students only contribute 4% to the private rental market in Australia. So it is right that we have a negotiation and do our part as a sector, but it's also important that the government does its part. We want to make sure that federal, state and local government works to deliver housing for all Australians as well as international students. So we've got a role to play, but certainly I think it's a Team Australia moment, Laura, where all of the Australian economy and governments need to work on this enormous housing challenge. Look, young Australians now are stressed about getting a rental property, let alone getting into the rental market. So it's important that we have the right settings for housing across the board. And the Reserve Bank has told us that construction and lack of supply is the main impediment to getting.
But I mean, the governments of all stripes are looking at short-term solutions, though, and this is one of those. Can you help them out?
Well, we're a long-term sector. Things happen, over 3 or 4 years with us, especially when you take a student doing a degree with us, and we're still recovering from COVID because of that. So we'll have a discussion with the government, but we can't do everything tomorrow. And what we want to make sure is that we're given the certainty and stability with the ability to access this important international student revenue so our universities can continue to deliver, including delivering housing and working with the private sector to develop that. And we'll be working with the Property Council and the Student Accommodation Council in the coming weeks to work out ways we can do that more collaboratively.
Okay, sounds like it could be a spicy meeting. I'd like to be a fly on the wall, but let us know how it goes.
There's always spicy meetings in an election year, Laura, so I look forward to many more.
Yeah, there certainly will be. Luke, thank you.